Titled The Other Player, Fallout Season 2 Episode 6 showed us that there was quite literally another player at the table, and despite Cooper thinking that Barb was the worst person that there could possibly be in the world, there were actually others at play that were threatening her, so realistically, she was just human after all. With New Mutant, the Automated Man, Betty losing power in the vault, and us seeing that Hank was originally just one small pawn in this large game, let's dive into this episode, break down the important details, explain the ending, and I'll share if it was any good. So let's get into it. Here is Fallout Season 2 Episode 6 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Barb's not as bad as she seems. The flashbacks that we had, which was where we pretty much saw all of Cooper and Barbara's scenes, were connected into the story by Ghoul being in a knocked out state and floating in and out of consciousness. So I thought that was a nice stylistic way of him almost remembering what was happening and it transitioning into the past. Despite Ghoul building up all of his strength to try and get himself off of the spike, even motivating himself with the thought of his daughter still being alive and being kept in cryosleep, it wasn't enough to get him to drag himself off of it. Janie being the motivating factor wasn't only at the heart of Cooper's story, but it was also at the heart of Barbara's. Within the flashback, Cooper believed that Barb was one of the worst people that could be in existence because she was planning on killing millions of people for the sake of saving just one, her daughter. However, what this episode taught us was that Barb wasn't actually as bad as what she seemed, and that she was simply carrying out orders because she was seen as a replaceable part in this machine that was constantly running. Cooper believed that what she said about dropping the bombs was coming from her, but as we saw in this episode, she was being controlled, and when Siggy told her that if she didn't follow orders, her and her family would be killed, she had no other option. This showed that Barb did actually have a heart and she didn't want to go through with it, but she was essentially being held hostage. The opening scene did that alone with the way that she was almost frozen solid at what she was being presented by the marketing team. They were standing at the front of the room presenting how devastating the bombs dropping should look on the billboard and also informing her that she had to select which vault should run out of water, essentially putting the survivors' lives in her control as well. The employees were standing there presenting these devastating outcomes whilst eating burgers and fries, showing that they didn't have a sense of empathy or sympathy at all, but with Barb not saying anything, it highlighted how she did. The opening shot was the explosion being present in her eye, which showed the terrible act that she had to commit on one side. But the final thing that we saw in her eye was the photo of her family, Cooper and Janie, and that she was doing it for them because if she didn't, then her and her whole family would end up dead. So she was quite literally stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of a moral perspective. Even though there was a divide between Cooper and Barb during the flashbacks, and it was made apparent that he viewed her as a monster, he took it upon himself to go and find the cold fusion that he thought was attached to Hank in the briefcase. However, once he opened it up, the cold fusion wasn't inside of the case. It was a device with a long needle that he knew nothing about. It was only when Barb walked back into the room where she put it into Hank's neck and then extracted cold fusion from within Hank, showing that it was being kept inside of him all along. I actually found Hank's involvement during the flashback scenes to be particularly interesting. With Vault-Tec, you never truly know what they're up to, but what it's clear to see during this time period is that he was somebody that was low down in the pecking order and was prepared to do whatever he could to get some form of recognition. Even simply sitting in and taking notes on the meeting where Robert House presented his Automated Man device, which is obviously why he has an affinity with it in the present day. So it seems like Vault-Tec felt like putting cold fusion inside of Hank, somebody who they believed was the safest person to put it into because they'd be the least likely person that anybody would go to. After all, he was just a note taker. This does also now make me wonder if the cold fusion that Cooper came across all of those years ago is the very one that ended up in his possession 200 years later, with Max and Thaddeus arriving to be his companions. Cooper and the Mutant. Following Cooper being impaled by the large spike at the end of the previous episode, we saw that during this one, he was channeling the love that he had for his daughter to help him drag himself off of the spike, but it simply wasn't enough. He was losing his mind, and the vials that were just over an arm's reach away were too difficult for him to reach. With nobody helping him, this was something that connected into what Hank said, where he referenced All Quiet on the Western Front, and everybody essentially being in the same position on the surface, but nobody being willing to help the other. Instead, people just watch others suffer and simply kill to survive. As Cooper was in and out of consciousness, a mutant that was known as an abomination rescued him, gave him uranium so he'd be healed, and then told him that he needed to be healthy because a war was coming. We didn't learn much about the abominations, but what we did learn was that they were created by the Enclave, and then once they'd had enough of them, they threw them to the side and took no responsibility for them, essentially making them outcasts. This is something that shares similar themes with the likes of Dr. Frankenstein and his monster. What this showed us was that the Enclave were essentially running human experiments just like Vault-Tec were, but they had no regard for life whatsoever. I think it's alluding to the Enclave potentially being the group that could have been responsible for dropping the bombs. With Cooper saying that he worked on his own and that he wanted no part of working with the mutants, they knocked him out and returned him to the street. However, the mutants did say to him that he'd need friends, and friends were the very thing that he got right at the end of the episode as Dogmeat ran and found Max and Thaddeus and led them to Cooper. So it seems like Cooper's going to have 2 new companions on his travels. Max did say that he wanted to get the cold fusion to Lucy because he wanted it to be in the hands of somebody that he believed had good intentions at their core. So could we be building towards that? Vaults 32 and 33. The politics of what's happening inside of the vaults is definitely my least favourite part of the show. I just find it quite boring and not much actually happens. However, what we did see in this episode was Reg basically losing his mind and letting the perceived power that he had go to his head. He was continuing to put on his inbreeding support group, and even though he thought that the events were going well and everybody was dancing and celebrating, which they weren't, we were just simply shown that so we could see how he perceived it. The group members were basically only there because of the rations that he was burning through. Vault 33 had a severe water supply issue, which it now seems like has stemmed from the decision that Barb had to make all of those years ago, and with Reg essentially not listening to the rules that Betty was enforcing and him going for a more careless approach. We saw the first signs of the people in the vault starting to side with Reg. This highlighted how Betty was starting to lose power within the vault, and the hard ruling that she leads with is something that people might be growing tiresome of. So I wonder if her position of power is something that's going to be thrown into jeopardy before the season draws to a close. As well as that, within Vault 33, we saw that Woody hadn't been seen for a while. This makes me think that Steph has had her scheming paws all over it. Following Woody hearing about the experiment that was taking place and the conversation between her and Betty, he's probably become a target. As well as that, Chet found out through the members of the Vault that he was soon to be getting married to Steph. He didn't realize that wedding bells were ringing, but what it showed was that Steph probably wanted to present herself as more of a stable overseer. So in her eyes, marriage could be a way of securing that. Hank and Lucy. Lucy woke up inside of the underground bunker of Vegas where Hank had been carrying out Robert House's work of the automated man. This segment was all about showing us just how much Lucy had been changed by the wasteland and that she wasn't the same person as what she was when she was raised and lived inside of the vault. Hank spoke of how violence dominated the wasteland, and violence was the very thing that she was planning on inflicting onto her father if he didn't go with her. She wanted him to face justice for the bombing of Shady Sands, and he was willing to go with her. However, as we saw, he had a plan up his sleeve to make sure that her mind was changed. Many people had been recruited and had the automated man device placed onto the back of their neck, and what we saw was that it essentially allowed the group to operate as some kind of hive mind. They were seamlessly moving between operations, and they had a sense of happiness and fulfillment, a feeling that wasn't present before, as what we saw with characters Gregory and Sherman was that there was violence ingrained within their core. Many of the people that Hank had put under his hive mind were criminals in the past and had violence down to the bone. However, once the device was switched on, they became more docile, relaxed, and friendlier. This made Lucy question for a brief moment if what Hank was doing was actually for the betterment of society, which in his mind is something that he thinks he's doing. He saw the world when it was tearing each other apart before the war, and he saw it happening afterwards as well, so I feel he believes he's doing something for the greater good of humankind. In Lucy's mind, these people would no longer be causing trouble on the surface like she'd seen, but instead they'd be much nicer people, even though they were under the control of one man. It did get me thinking if Hank would ever do this to Lucy. However, I don't think he would. Instead, Lucy is becoming a subject of the environment that she's being placed in. So, in a way, Hank exposing her to all of this is almost like him pressing a metaphorical button. My review of the episode. I thought this was a strong episode of the show. I don't think it was as good as last week, as I feel like the plot in the present day was quite thin this time round. I'd say I got more substance from the flashbacks, and to be honest, the main plot felt like the secondary one to the revelations that were going on in the past. I think that's something that I really noticed with this show, because Walton Goggins is such a good bloody actor. Whenever it cuts to him as Cooper Howard pre-war, I just want to stay in that time period because I find that story to be far more engaging. The emotions that are present and the true sense of discomfort is something that you just can't escape, and I love it. One thing that I think this show is falling victim to is the fact that there are too many side plots going on, and every week one gets thrown to the wayside. Last week it was the Vaults and also Max and Thaddeus, and in this week's episode it was Norm. We keep getting these cliffhangers in episodes and then end up not returning to them for at least 2 episodes, and I find it quite frustrating. If there were less main plots or if the whole show was released at once, that sense of emptiness wouldn't be felt as much, so I think that's probably the most jarring thing about the show, that friction that it causes. In saying that, all of the stories are engaging and I do feel immersed when watching them. The only time I'm ready to duck out of one is when it gets to Vault 32 or Vault 33. I just find it quite boring. When it comes to the performances in the show, I think the main actors that are carrying it for me are Walton Goggins and also Ella Purnell. They deliver the most convincing performances and I just buy their characters completely. They have true moral dilemmas at their core and you can see their mind battling with the decisions and what to do and if it's right or wrong every time they make a single move, and realistically, you need characters like that. Even though this episode was around 50 minutes, I feel like it absolutely flew by. That's one thing I will say about Fallout. It's a show that every week I look forward to tuning into because you know that the storytelling is of a level that's really digestible and of a quality that's easy to follow. It doesn't get lost in the many different stories that it has. Yes, it does have quite a few different arcs going on, maybe too many for my liking, but in my opinion, it does handle them well. Honestly, I can't actually believe there's only 2 episodes left this season. It's absolutely flown by. With it building towards the season finale, I'm sure it's only going to get better and better, so bring it on. So, there you have it, Fallout Season 2 Episode 6, Ending Explained. If you want to see every episode of Fallout Season 2 being broken down, then check the playlist below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. What did you think of this episode? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.